mogę doczekać się naszego odlotu.
O, ja też będziemy miały bardzo długi lot. Chodź, idziemy oddać bagaże.
Dobrze,
بتفكر بدك تطلب؟
كنت بفكر انه بدي لحم غنم وانت؟
لحم غنم طيب كثير، أنا كنت بفكر إنه بدي دجاج مع لبنة.
Whenever I hear people speaking Arabic or Slavic language, no matter which dialect of Arabic or which Slavic language, it could be in the streets, in a mall, at a restaurant, in an airport, I turn around to see who they are, always. I want to blurt out, hey folks, you may not know this, but hey, I'm one of you. Kind of.
You are not one of us.
Hate to break the news to you, pal, but you're white.
You're like really white.
You don't look like a Jamil.
You're Polish, remember?
This is what an Arab American looks like.
When you're an American with Arab and Slavic blood and an Arabic name and white skin, it makes for some rather interesting conversation and a fair amount of confusion.
Jamil Khoury? You're Arab.
Yes? Well, I'm half Arab.
I never would have guessed. I mean, you look like an American.
Oh, well, I am an American.
I mean, a real American. Your parents, they're from...
My father's originally from Syria. He came to the US back in the 50s. My mother was born in Chicago, of Polish and Slovak heritage.
You look Syrian.
Thank you.
Your eyes. Arab.
The clips you are watching are from my quasi-autobiographical short play WASP, White, Arab, Slovak, Pole. In writing WASP, I set out to explore my relationship to Arabs and Slavs. And yet, along the way, I ended up exploring the issue of whiteness. So I decided to investigate my race in a documentary, and to speak with others who have also considered what it means to be white in America, and with whom I share Arab and Slavic backgrounds.
I'm a WASP. A white Arab Slovak Pole.
Well, I define myself as, of course, as a white American of Polish descent.
Lebanese, with the diasporic history that extends into Brazil as well.
Identify with the Polish American working class, who were then called ethnics, white ethnics. I also identify with their predecessors who were not yet white ethnics.
I am a WASP. I am a white Anglo-Spanish Palestinian. My father is from Honduras, where his Palestinian parents went. My mother's half Costa Rican. And the ancestors that came from my mother's side were all Jews. So I'm a white Anglo-Sephardic Palestinian.
Okay. We're playing with acronyms now. Interesting angle.
Semitic Slav, Slavic Semite, think kibbeh and kielbasa.
You're like all-American white.
Midwest farm boy white.
Chicago cop white.
Isn't racial profiling generally considered a bad thing?
In this country, being born white, it's like hitting the jackpot.
You won the lottery, boyfriend.
Whiteness is... It's like membership without the application process. An automatic upgrade to first class. Instant access to the secret code.
Whiteness has a persistence to it. There's no doubt. Whiteness has legs. It's the trusted brand, the market leader. And there are many people, both in the United States and around the world, who wish they were white. Is this wish political, material, aesthetic, or is it something else?
Whiteness as a category ultimately has no objective basis. it is about power ultimately.
Whiteness is a constructed identity that benefits some and doesn't benefit others. Whiteness precedes and sort of qualifies one as fully American.
Jamil, is it true that Arabs are considered Caucasian?
Yes, I call it white without the benefits.
Good thing you've got that Slavic blood to fall back on.
Not exactly. Poles, Serbs, Russians. We Slavs were banished to the outer reaches of the white stratosphere eons ago.
Jamil, are you saying that Anglo-Saxons the real deal?
No Slovaks or Polacks on the Mayflower, that's for sure.
Maybe whiteness did find its ideal mate in Anglo-Saxon Protestants, or at least non-poor Anglo-Saxon Protestants. But when whiteness hooked up with Arabs and Slavs, the courtship turned rocky. The same can be said about the Irish, the Italians, the Greeks, the Jews. Whiteness plays favorites.
The first wave of European immigrants were mostly from Northern and Western Europe. They had an easier assimilation than people with names that you couldn't pronounce like mine. And so there was a clash right from the very beginning.
Southern and Eastern European immigrants, as a larger group, were not considered white when they first arrived. Historians, sociologists around ethnicity will refer to the category pigs: Poles, Italians, Greeks, and Slavs. These groups were considered racially inferior. They were not white, but they were also not African American. So they benefited from racial apartheid, but they also were not considered white.
Finally, in the 1920s, immigration from Europe was cut off, basically to stop these Eastern and Southern Europeans from coming into the country.
Arabs maintain an honorary white status. We can selectively claim whiteness when it benefits us, and we occasionally are as well stripped of whiteness, sometimes arbitrarily.
We've been struggling to be seen as white people because white people are winners, and to quote, "Don't back no losers," which is to say that Arabs would get in the winning line, which was to be white. So why would you identify with anything less than what would make you and your children the most successful Americans you could possibly be?
When Arabs came in the late 19th century and early 20th century, they themselves had really no prior understanding of race. They didn't think of themselves in racial terms. Arabs as a group drew a lot of scrutiny from U.S. American elites because U.S. Americans didn't know how to define Arabs, racially speaking. And so Arabs were claiming whiteness because in order to gain U.S. citizenship, one had to be a white person in good moral standing or of African nativity. When they applied for citizenship, in several cases in the early 20th century, they were denied on the basis that they were of Asiatic birth. And so there was a concerted effort on the part of Syrian immigrant elites to hire lawyers, consult with scientists to try to prove their whiteness. They would say, well, Arabs are white because we come from a part of the world that Jesus came from. Therefore, is Jesus not white? And in many of these cases, they quote unquote won.
Eventually, Slavs and Arabs were afforded whiteness, but it was a qualified whiteness, a conditional whiteness. They were not quite white. White with an asterisk, aspiring whites, acclimating whites, honorary whites, titular whites, in-between whites, transitioning whites, not quite yet fully almost sort of whites.
It was believed that the new immigrants were too dirty, too foreign, either too Catholic or too Jewish, depending on which group they were talking about, well-suited to manual labor, perceived as docile, too ignorant to ever fully be assimilated into the racial superiority of Northern and Western Europeans. I found one sociological study that claimed that Slavs are immune to certain kinds of dirt, that they could, quote, stand what would kill a white man.
There's a wonderful book called by Madison Grant, called A Passing of the Great Race, in which he warns that the Jews and the Poles and the Slovaks and all are going to intermarry with white Anglo-Saxon Protestant women and destroy the Anglo-Saxon race. I understand Hitler enjoyed the book quite a bit himself and had it translated.
It's fascinating to me how two groups as seemingly different as Slavs and Arabs have both experienced white racism while ostensibly being white themselves. And this official classification of Arab Americans as white does carry a bitter irony. The relentless persistence of anti-Arab and anti-Muslim racism in this country does not see white.
Arabs confronted this sort of biracial order within the United States in the first half of the 20th century. The case is the lynching of Nola Rumni, this Syrian in Florida. This was the Jim Crow South. Him and his wife began talking to an officer as if they were equals. The officer obviously did not view them as equals. And so when this white police officer saw this Syrian, this foreigner, talking back to him, the Syrian man ended up lynched.
My own heritage has been spelled back to me in a way that's completely fraudulent. The mainstream news media coming out from the day that we were all born, my generation, indicating that Palestinian is synonymous with terrorist. The two words married very naturally because of the way that that story is constantly told in the mainstream news media. It was almost cartoonish. So it really wasn't until I started hanging out with a Middle Eastern person that I learned, quite to the contrary, U.S. foreign policy is endorsing a racist apartheid system to keep the Palestinians completely suppressed.
تحكي عربي. You must speak Arabic, ya Jamil.
Oh, I know. I understand Arabic way better than I can speak it. Hell, I don't know a word of Polish or Slovak.
Why would you?
In many ways, whiteness tells Arabs and Slavs to stop being Arabs and Slavs.
American mainstream culture has awarded white ethnics white status, and partially through trade-offs on the part of the group, sometimes willingly abandoning their names, their language.
I was raised in a family that was Spanish-speaking on both sides of the family. My parents had 8 children who were not encouraged to speak Spanish. A house full of barefoot people speaking Spanish, not cool. It wasn't the surest way to become financially successful or socially successful.
You know, some of these American-born Arabs, they never go home. They're lost. They want to be more American than the Americans.
Yeah. It's the whole assimilation thing. They kind of screwed it up.
I see World War II really as a big assimilating event. People went off being Polish and Lithuanian and German and Irish and Bohemian. They came back Americans. And also as people's worlds widened, they began to intermarry with other groups, began to see other things. And of course also of being assimilated into the bad parts of being American. To become American and white is to become racist. That's part of the assimilation process. The Poles begin to realize, like, wait a minute, to become American is to know that blacks are to be kept away from, blacks are to be kept out of your neighborhood. To become American, to be accepted, is to make that separation.
Arabs are victims of racism and victimizers as well. Instead of allying with African Americans, with Asians, Arabs threw everyone else under the bus, said, okay, we're not like you, we want to be like the whites. That is, in order to become American, that immigrants must adopt racism against blacks.
You've got Polish Americans participating in the Trumbull Park riots in the 1950s. You've got Polish Americans participating in the Market Park riots in the 1960s. Like all so-called white Americans, they reacted to integration. Why? The American dream is one of upward mobility. They had just crawled up to the middle class status, and here came the blacks. And there were arguments between the black community over jobs, housing, and politics. watch these blacks, because you want to crawl over them to the top.
There's this very interesting triangulation where the white ethnic knows that they are in a different social position than the African American who's despised, but they also know that they're despised as white ethnics.
There's nothing inherently about Arabs that would have them hate other peoples of color, but it's a world that was colonized by Europe. We're all put on different rungs of the ladder, and Arabs claim that they're on a higher rung and therefore adopt a racism against others in order to maintain their own position.
There was no special gene for bigotedness in Slavic people, but the Polish joke in maligning Slavs did other work. By having a compressed cultural category that quickly can point out as a marker, this group is bigoted, backwards, uneducated, that actually shifts the attention from the larger racial politics of the culture and says the racism in this culture isn't really found in the structure of the culture that reproduces and maintains white supremacy and inequality. The real problem of racism is to be found in those backward Polacks, who, as we all know, are bigots. It said that the problem with especially urban racism was white ethnics, not the people who profited from real estate deals and redlining.
Is it true you consider yourself a race traitor?
I've always felt like an imposter at the white party.
Party's about to end, white boy.
A poser. A gatecrasher.
Don't even try playing that game.
Stealth brownie in whiteface.
One day, being white won't command the premium that it does now.
Do I consider myself a person of color? Do I look like a person of color? My husband Malik, he's a person of color. Now I understand why for some people it's important or even strategic to describe me as a person of color. As a political stance, I get it, I'm there. But as an aesthetic or experiential descriptor, I feel like I'm being dishonest.
Being born and raised in New Orleans, Louisiana, I was most certainly raised to think of myself as white. The fact that there was this Palestinian stripe was an odd color nobody quite knew what to do with. And then when inventions of social distinction like brown come around, you sort of measure yourself against that, and that's what I found myself doing. I was a white person that always had the feeling that I didn't quite fit that description, but I didn't know why. I started to identify as a brown person, and quite proudly so. I found that certain members of my family didn't appreciate my referencing myself as brown, because if you get away from being brown, then you should be glad, and then celebrate the fact that you didn't have to be in that pool of suffering. Be glad, and then run with it. But I never understood that. I understood myself as being now a member of a community of brownness that gave me a sense of belonging, a sense of place, a sense of community.
I identify myself as a person of color, but I recognize as well that I benefit from white privilege that I personally hadn't fought for or claimed, but that previous generations of Arab immigrants to this country had fought for.
From the standpoint of Arabs, I can certainly understand why it was at one time very important to identify as white. But there was a cynical turn when the census came out and it was possible to lobby for a change in access to social services on some level that comes with being a member of a minority. And so check it right, you ain't white became the rallying cry for Arab Americans. It was certainly a shift in the consciousness to a more utilitarian approach to whiteness or non-whiteness.
Arab Americans today want to claim an identity as people of color, but without acknowledging the fact that we've selectively benefited from white privilege. And today, it's easier to identify with other peoples of color. The Jim Crow era has ended. The explicitly anti-Asian immigration policy ended.
In the history of creating the category of whiteness, some of that history has been forgotten and covered over, and I don't want to forget that. Poles and Slavs generally were highly involved in the labor movements, in the fight for working justice, in very bold ways when you consider how much an immigrant had to lose, and put their lives on the line and sometimes lost their lives.
I think one thing that happens with Americans, especially Americans of, let's say, the second or third generation, you have an emptiness, a yearning, a sense of community that is not there, that you yearn for. Sometimes I think if only I could go back to Babka's Green Kitchen, I could be warm and safe again.
Nie mogę doczekać się naszego odlotu.
O, ja też będziemy miały bardzo długi lot. Chodź, idziemy oddać bagaże.
شو بتفكر بدك تطلب؟
كنت بفكر انه بدي لحم غنم وانت؟
oddaję jedną walizkę, a
لحم
potem
غنم طيب كثير، أنا كنت بفكر إنه بدي دجاج مع لبنة. يلا نروح هذا المحل نشوف لو نلاقي شيء نشتري لأحمد.
Ultimately, we're all not quite white. We're all failed whites because whiteness lies to white people, and it especially lies to poor whites. Because whiteness defines us in opposition to the very polycultural world in which we actually exist. In a few decades, there will be no ethnic or racial majority in the United States. We will all be minorities. And frankly, that America already exists. I live in that America.
I do feel like a genuine American in the fact that I'm a blend. And Americans do use the expression melting pot often enough. So I'd like to identify what is American as what is our best selves. And so being their best would be people who would stand up for the underdog.
Slowly but surely we keep redefining the American Revolution to be inclusive and inclusive and inclusive. So now women have the right to vote, African Americans have the right to vote, and people from China can become naturalized citizens, people from Nigeria can become naturalized citizens. We're now giving gay people rights. That's a redefinition of the American Revolution. We redefine the American Revolution every time we have a new generation. And I tell my students, you have to redefine it next. It's your job now. My job is over. I'm in my 60s. I'm done.